if my PowerPoint works correct. There you go. Thank you, Dr. Turner. My name is John Vu. And before I start, please let me formally introduce my thesis committee. First, you saw Dr. Turner. He's a professor at the computer science department. He's also my thesis advisor, committee chair, and he's also known to play his mandolin out at Dexter. Next, Dr. Chance. She is a professor at the statistics department. She is also my statistics advisor, and she has been very helpful in the statistical sections of my thesis. So thank you, Dr. Chance. Dr. Kerp is here. He is a professor at the computer science department, and I've taken classes with him in the graphical user interface classes and also human-computer interaction. And hopefully Dr. Vicalis, who's the department chair of the computer science department, will be here, and he was very helpful when I was contacting the industrial advisory board for my thesis. So, thank you again for coming here. My thesis is titled Software Internationalization, a Framework Validated Against Industry Requirements for Computer Science and Software Engineering Programs. I hope you will find my research informative, useful, and rewarding, but I also hope you will see how it will contribute to the computer science and software engineering fields. So if all of you guys were able to come in, you guys got my accompanying handout that I've actually had right here by the chair back there. And the handout has figures, tables, and bibliography so that when you see superscripts throughout this whole entire presentation, you can refer to the bibliography on the last number of pages. Here's my thesis defense outline. First, I will start off with the introduction. Then I will present the biggest part of the thesis, which is the research question. Then we will talk about the state of education of software internationalization, dive into the industry survey questionnaire, and end it off with the conclusion. And if you have any questions at all, please hold it off until the end. But if you really need to give a question, please definitely raise your hand and I will answer it accordingly. And by the way, my committee would love to hear your questions because they are determining my fate of whether or not I'll get a master's degree. So, let's start with the introduction. There are 4 key questions in the introduction that I like to ask. What is software internationalization? Is software internationalization important? Are students actively learning software internationalization? And are industry requirements being met for software internationalization? Going on the first question, what is software internationalization? And here are the key terms. Software internationalization is the process of producing an application that can be localized for a particular country without any changes being made to the program code. Localization is the process of adapting software for a particular geographical region or locale. And globalization, on the other hand, is the process of making all the necessary technical, financial, managerial, personnel, marketing, and other enterprise decisions to facilitate international business. Now, some people out there are a little bit confused between the word internationalization and localization. So let me give you a good analogy on it. Software internationalization is providing the infrastructure for software so that localization is possible. Another good analogy is that software internationalization allows a programmer to plug in localization information such as their culture, locales, and very information into software with ease and without too much overhead. And for those who are curious about those abbreviations right up there, for example, the word internationalization, it's I-18N because there's actually 18 characters between the letter I and the letter N. And same thing for localization and globalization for 11 characters between L and N for localization, and globalization is 10 letters between G and N. The next question is software internationalization important? One study concluded that software internationalization is one of the most important aspects of software development with respect to the globalization process in the world. There were various factors leading up to this. For example, there has been an increased number of computers. For those who have been here for ages, you definitely know that there are computers in our homes now. In addition to that, there's an increase in demand of software outside the United States. Since software started in the United States and were developed by Americans, it started here, but now there's a huge demand outside the United States. And of course, the growing internet. And that's the reason why the software internationalization is one of the most important things. Now, in terms of revenue, software internationalization constitutes more than half the revenues of the top 100 United States software companies. And according to the 2006 Global Fortune 500, individual companies yield a revenue of $5.9 trillion and profits of $365 billion from software internationalization sales. Simply put, the benefits of software internationalization is that it brings in huge savings, increased revenues and profits, and shorter product time to market. The next question is, are students actively learning software internationalization? In 2001, the Association of Computing Machinery and the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers Computing Curriculum state that it is important to address the need to develop implementation models that are international in scope and can be practiced in universities around the world. Now, that quote can be applied to basically anything in our computing curriculum. But the key thing is that it's mentioning is that the computer industry is going global, and we are being dependent on one another. Now, the quotation, another thing to mention, is that the increasing connectivity through the internet and a move towards the global economy has placed software internationalization a very important concern for developers. In addition to that, the knowledge is so essential for companies seeking to go global or who are already global. But the problem is there is a clear shortage of persons with entry-level positions who want to go into software internationalization, and there is an increasing demand for those graduates with such knowledge, and it has been happening over time. Now, the next question is, are industry requirements being met for software internationalization? A quotation from Eric Brechner sums it all up. Eric Brechner, director of Microsoft Development Training, wrote a paper called Things They Would Not Teach Me of in College. He suggested 5 new courses to add to that computing curriculum. But the reason why he added those courses is because he noticed that the students who were going into Microsoft, there was a clear gap of what they were learning in their courses compared to what they should have learned before they entered into the company. So here's a good quotation that sums it up about software internationalization, globalization, and localization. A course on globalization and accessibility is long overdue on college campuses. It is embarrassing to take graduates from a college with a diverse student population and have to teach them how to write software for a diverse set of customers. It should be part of introductory software development. Anything less is insulting to students, their families, and the peoples of the world. Those are strong words that Eric Brechner made. The next part of my presentation is the most important part of my thesis, the research question. We have seen that students are not adequately learning about software internationalization, and we have seen that we are not meeting industry requirements for software internationalization. Therefore, here's the research question, which we will go over what the question is and also how to answer it. The research question is there a framework for software internationalization that has been validated against industry requirements? Of all my research and all the literature review that I've seen, I've concluded that there is not a single framework out there that is for software internationalization that has been validated against industry requirements. I have gone through a lot of papers that has a framework, which is great, but they haven't been validated, it hasn't been checked. How do you know it's actually good? So, my conclusion is you need to develop a framework. A framework is a standard set of skills and knowledge that can be taught by any knowledgeable professor. And for those who have taken software engineering, the framework is a lot like a software requirement specification, in that it must be complete, consistent, modifiable, and traceable. The framework will also provide a communication between academia and industry that can serve as a common reference point. Now, to develop such a framework, the most important key for the literature review is determining what is the state of education for software internationalization. There are 3 key ideas. How the state of education is viewed in the context of requirements problem. How the state of education can be facilitated by the educational architectural models, and how the state can be broken down to a set of requirements from literature review. The state of education for software internationalization can be viewed in the context of a requirements problem. Carl Wiegers defined, and by the way, Carl Wiegers, for those who are computer science students, he's the one who actually wrote some of the books in our software engineering courses. He defines a requirement as a statement of a customer need or objective, or of a condition or capability that a product must possess to satisfy such a need or objective. A property that a product must have to provide value to a stakeholder. He states that the characteristics of an excellent requirement are complete, correct, feasible, necessary, prioritized, unambiguous, and verifiable. Earlier I mentioned about how students are not adequately learning about software internationalization, and also the fact that we are not meeting the industry requirements for software internationalization. This problem also can be seen in the requirements definition. For example, the customers are the industry, the products are the qualified students, and the customer need or objective is for students to have the knowledge of software internationalization. Therefore, this brings to our overarching requirement, which is to provide qualified computer science and software engineering students with the knowledge of software internationalization to the industry. But the thing is, when you look at that requirement, it's a little bit too big. And the most important thing is we need to break that down to a smaller number of requirements. Kind of like when we take our software engineering courses. Here's a big grand idea that the customer gives us, but the thing is that in order to get to that place, we need to break it down. So to begin breaking that down, there are 3 proposed educational architectural models presented that will address the state of education for software internationalization. They are integration into existing courses, develop an entire course for software internationalization, and study abroad for experience in software internationalization. For integration into existing courses, it is used by many computing curricula. It's actually used by Cal Poly too in our computer science department. This model allows students to see how topics work with other fields such as software engineering, databases, and of course computer ethics with Dr. Turner. Unfortunately, this does not imply that the topics were discussed in depth or applied in projects. And because of this, this results in incompleteness of knowledge in software internationalization. Next, you can develop an entire course for software internationalization. But the problem is it's very rare to adopt this model. Doing a brief search on Google, there are only 7 colleges that even has an entire course devoted to software internationalization compared to 3 colleges back in 1998. However, comparing to the previous models, at least the topics are discussed in depth or applied to projects. However, the model is not feasible or cost-effective. Try to imagine going to RD and trying to create this course now. Since most computing are already rigorous and most students are trying to graduate on time, many universities find little incentive to add anything to their courses. And lastly, the final model that will totally integrate software internationalization firsthand is study abroad for experience. Working alongside with international computer scientists, students would experience a different culture and integrate globalization and technology material into their work and laboratory assignments. They will understand how it impacts society, such as cultural issues, practices, and laws. Unfortunately, the model is not feasible or cost-effective, since it only benefits a limited number of students. And if you're in a college of engineering, most likely studying abroad is not usually a choice in your curriculum at all. After presenting you these 3 architectural models right here, the only one that I feel is most feasible and cost-effective for the state of education for software internationalization is integrating into existing courses. However, that is my opinion, but we need to validate it with the industry. That we'll discuss later. Next, to continue breaking down the overarching requirement presented here is the set of requirements compiled from literature review. These underlying set of requirements embody the state of education in software internationalization and derives from the customer's overarching requirement, which is to provide qualified computer science and software engineering students with the knowledge of software internationalization to the industry. The 5 major areas are definition and standards, development practices, translation and documentation, social responsibility and ethics, and cultural concerns. Starting with definition and standards, it's a foundational requirement. The reason why I'm saying it's a foundational requirement is because how can you know software internationalization without knowing the definitions or the standards? So, during my research at Cal Poly, I conducted a case study and found out that a majority of Cal Poly computer science and software engineering students were unaware and unfamiliar with software internationalization. Therefore, students should at least know the definitions of internationalization, localization, and globalization, and how they differ. Students should also know the various standards out there too, such as Unicode, CLDR, ISO, W3C, and LISA. And And one thing I like to mention is that for Unicode, for those who don't know what it is, it's a huge milestone for software internationalization in the fact that it has provided character sets for 99% of world's known languages. Next, the requirement that embodies Cal Poly's philosophy of learn by doing is development practices. Students should at least apply the technologies of software internationalization, or at least know what to use. Because instead of reinventing the wheel, students can use technologies such as the ICU project, which is an open source project providing the backbone for software internationalization. Although some students would initially believe that software internationalization is easy, they will soon be the judge if they got their hands down and dirty with software internationalization. The thing about software internationalization is that it requires special diligence, and students would be exposed to software development techniques and learn the perils and pitfalls of such projects. Next, within translation and documentation, there are 4 key areas. There is direction, sorting, date and time, number, and currency. Some people are unaware that translating is actually very difficult between languages. For example, when you're translating words from English to another languages, it's usually about 40% longer. It requires special fonts, does not exist in other languages, and sometimes does not translate well in other cultures. For example, if you use like a photo digiting imaging software, you know the word panning, zooming, that does not exist in Thailand. How would you communicate to them? And apparently there's words like uno in Spanish, it means one, but if you use the word uno in other languages, it actually could mean something really bad. Actually, that's discussed in my thesis and I forgot what it meant. So, first let's start with direction. In English, we read from left to right, top to bottom. In Arabic, it's read from right to left. And in some Asian countries, it's actually read from top to bottom initially. Those are the things that we need to be aware of when we're designing our software. Now for sorting, there are rules in regards to capitalization, dialects, character sets, and pitch. Now, I don't know a lot of other languages that well, but I know in the Vietnamese language that it's very important of how you sort it. For example, the Spanish character CH, it's actually its own entity. It's actually between the letters C and D. And the CH is not actually separated as 2 characters at all, and they have to be placed that way. And in Chinese, if you guys remember, it's sorted by the number of strokes, not by any alphabet that we would totally fully understand. Now, for date and time, see the ambiguous example right there, 02, 03, 09. To us, it's February 3rd, 2009, but in other countries, it could also mean March 9th, 2002, or it could mean March 2nd, 2009. Which one is it? Those are the things that, you know, some of us as computer science students are like, oh, you can just write it like that because it's simple. But the thing is, you need to be as explicit as much as possible. And there's also different calendaring systems, such as us, we use the Gregorian calendar, but there's people who use the lunar calendar, imperial calendar, and Islamic calendar. And for the Islamic calendar, one of the characteristics that I know about them is that their day restarts during sunset, and also their weekends are actually Thursday and Friday instead of Saturday and Sundays for us. So that's very important, especially if you're a banking system and trying to determine which days that you should give interest and so on. Those are the things to be mindful of. Which goes to the next one, number and currency. There's your ambiguous example of $1,234.56. Is that for the United States, Australia, or Zimbabwe? And in addition to that, all the countries have their own different currency symbols and also placeholders. For example, instead of a comma, they might use a period, semicolon, they could use various characters or even a space too. Those are the things to be mindful of. And why is this important? Well, it's important to basic financial markets because when you're converting values between different countries, it needs to be the same. Any little tiny cent is off can, you know, save the company as much money as much as possible. Next, on social responsibility and ethics. If you're a Cal Poly and you're a computer science or software engineering student, you are required to complete a professional responsibility course with Dr. Turner. This course gives the student the ins and outs of being a computing professional by learning the Association of Computing Machinery Software Engineering Code of Ethics. For example, students will understand how a poorly designed software can affect different groups of people. Now, within the software internationalization field, LISA, which is the Localization Industry Standards Association, developed the GILT industry ethics. And if you want to know what GILT stands for, it is globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation. Lastly, and possibly the most important requirement, in my opinion, is cultural concerns. The requirement is separated into 4 key areas of colors, visual elements, noise elements, and laws and customs. Some people are unaware that cultural aspects play a central role in localization, where there have been cases of real-world market failures and damaged business relationships. In terms of color, Table 1 provides the many cultural associations in the handout. You can see there. For example, the color white means purity in the United States, but it also means death in Japan. And the color red means warning or stop in the United States, but it also means happiness and luck in China. Why is this important? Well, just imagine you ship off a software that's completely in English to China, and there's a dialogue that pops up. It's in red. To us, it says, press this button to delete your whole entire hard drive. Well, to them, it might mean a good symbol, and they might press it, and they eventually delete their whole entire hard drive. Those are things to be mindful of. In terms of visual elements, they are helpful for enhancing a program, but they can also be offensive or ambiguous. For example, in conservative regions like the Islamic countries, you should not have a software that has pictures of women in bikinis or anything close to that, because it is very, very bad to do that. It's very offensive. As for ambiguous images, well, for example, us in the United States, we have postal boxes with that red leaf, whatever. Other countries don't use that. And also trash bins that we see out there on the sides. It actually looks like a postal box in Great Britain. And one of my favorite ones, this hand of affirmation, which means like, okay, and so on. It means worthless or zero in France, homosexuality in some Mediterranean countries, or just plain vulgar in Brazil or Germany. So just be mindful if you visit any of those countries. In terms of noise elements, we have computer beeps all the time, right? When you're in the computer lab. But the thing is, a computer beep is actually more embarrassing in Japan. A computer beep actually means it is your fault, and it's really, really bad, and everybody looks at you. Compared to here, if you have a computer beep, they're like, oh, that person made an error. But this one is like, you really screwed up. That's how they feel. In terms of laws and customs, for example, in recent news about Google and China, and you know that Google is possibly backing out from China slowly. But before then, Google was abiding with the Chinese government by censoring a lot of results from their website. Those are the laws and customs I'm talking about. And in France, Germany, and also Japan, all the user interface, online help, and documentation needs to be translated before you can deploy it at those countries. And also, one of the things I kind of knew when I was born as an Asian is that in Japan, when you exchange business cards, it's not like something where you exchange business cards in the United States where you're like, oh, now I know your name, and your phone number, and your email address, great, I can contact you. Over there, it's actually when you exchange business cards, it's to symbolize seniority, to see whether or not you should fully respect this person or be condescending to somebody lower. And seniority is very, very important, and it's also very important among my Asian household too. Now, each underlying set of requirements embody the state of education for software internationalization. And it derives from the customer's overarching requirement is to provide qualified computer science and software engineering students with the knowledge of software internationalization to the industry. However, in order for my set of requirements to be worthy of anything, it must be validated, which goes to the next slide. The industry survey questionnaire. To validate it is basically, I'm going directly to the customer, which is the industry, and saying to them, in order for computer science and software engineering students to be prepared for the industry, which set of these requirements must students learn, be aware about, or apply? This section will cover the design and the result and analysis. Here's the outline of the design of the industry survey questionnaire broken into 5 key areas. The goal, the summary of hypothesis, data observations and hypothesis tests, subjects, survey design, and procedure. The overall goal of the industry survey questionnaire is to ensure that the requirements of our industry customer, which is to hire computer science and software engineering students who are knowledgeable in software internationalization, is complete. and feasible. The goal of the industry survey is also to provide a framework validated by the industry, but also provide a framework that is portable and standardized. Now, if you want to see the full summary of hypothesis, because I didn't want to overwhelm you, please see Table 2 of your handout. In Table 2, there's also abbreviations within there that will be used when discussing the results later in the presentations. And of course, you can see how big the table is, and I don't want to put that in one slide. Now, there are 24 statements that can be answered on a Likert scale. And the definition of Likert scale is to determine how a respondent feels strongly about a particular statement or question. And the options to answer those were strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither, somewhat disagree, and strongly disagree. And you can see that each of the statements starts out with, in order for computer science and software engineering graduates to be prepared for industry, students must ... Under data observations and hypothesis tests, I will use statistics on the responses to the industry survey questionnaire. Statistics is the science of collecting, analyzing, presenting, and interpreting data, and hypothesis testing is a form of statistical inference. Sorry, I don't think that's correct, right? Inference that uses data from a sample to draw conclusions about a population parameter. Of course, Dr. Chance will correct me at the end of this presentation if I'm completely wrong about this. There are 4 things that I have done under this section. First, I need to check that the sample size is sufficient enough for hypothesis testing. Second, I will calculate the averages for each of the statements using the Likert scale by assigning the values of 1 to 5. And using these calculated averages, we can sort the values and determine which statements the industry representative most strongly agree with to most strongly disagree with. Third, I will use the first hypothesis test to measure whether each of the statements receive responses with equal proportions. In other words, do we have enough evidence to suggest that the choices were not equally likely? Lastly, my second hypothesis test is to measure whether each of the statements receive responses with significant majority, that is, 50%. My interests are whether a significant majority overall agree, overall disagree, or strongly agree or strongly disagree about a certain statement. Next, the subjects or the customers of the industry survey questionnaire were industry representatives stemming mostly from the software sector. I was fortunate enough to contact members of major organizations such as ACM, LISA, and the Unicode Consortium. And also with the help of Dr. Callis, I was able to also contact the Industry Advisory Board. When contacting the subjects, I also gathered demographics to also help understand the diversity of responses and whether there were any bias. Under the survey design and question and procedure, I will discuss the tools for gathering data, the Human Subjects Committee, and the procedure. A number of options were considered when gathering the responses. I could have, mailed something, called them up, but I think the most cost-effective and the quickest way was by email and sending them a link to a web survey. Before I even had any of the respondents answer the industry survey questionnaire, the consent form and survey were reviewed and approved by Dr. Steve Davis, chair of the Cal Poly Human Subjects Committee. The consent webpage is the first thing the respondents see before they even start the survey questionnaire. In regards to the survey questionnaire, it was also the 3rd and 4th web pages, and you can see that in your handout if you're interested. And each one of them contains a definition of software internationalization and localization. And the statements that were used were actually the ones that you just saw on the table earlier. I sent 2 rounds of emails to each of the companies. The first email was to say, hey, here's a survey that will be very beneficial to my research and beneficial to universities and to the companies. Well, the second email was just a final reminder and also to give them an update of how many people actually responded so far. And at that point, I received about over 100, which was very, very nice. The industry survey questionnaire was a total of 5 pages, and the respondents can omit any items that they wanted that they did not want to answer. And you can view the screenshots found in the handout. All right, the next following slides are actually the fun ones. They are really graphic-y. And they are demographics and the data results of the survey. First, I'd like to discuss with you about the response rate. About 1,000 companies were successfully contacted by email. What I mean by successful contact is that it was able to deliver to someone within the company and not rejected by the server. And the surprising part too is I found out that during the recession, a lot of companies got bought by either the big guys like Oracle and Microsoft and Symantec too. In the end, there were a total of 361 recorded responses. But the thing is, I still need to filter those out for two relevant reasons. One, the responses, they answered a few questions, but they didn't answer any of the statements at all. They left it all blank. I'm like, that's not useful at all. And the other thing is, they were clearly not part of the industry. For example, I had a professor and students answering it. And I think the most interesting one was there was a professor that says, most loved professor. And I was just like, well, you just made yourself obvious that you're not part of the industry. So I eliminated them. So at the end, there was only 278 valid responses. Now do keep in mind, it is not 278 divided by 1,000. It's 278 valid responses because there might be companies that had multiple representatives to answer. But there were 1,000 companies that were successfully contacted. And by the way, emailing to 1,000 companies was not that fun, especially when you're writing the same email over and over again. Now, as for participating companies, there were a total of 148 distinct companies. A full list can be found on page 4 of your handout. And you can see these are the big companies that I want to list out there. The only company that I was kind of shocked, even though I talked to them directly multiple times, but they didn't answer, is Apple. They apparently refused to answer my industry survey questionnaire. But I was able to get Google, Microsoft, Adobe, of course, and MasterCard too, and Sun Microsystem before they are now, where are they now? Oracle. Yeah, thank you. So I got a few people who were willing to answer it, and there were a few responses on there too that I was kind of shocked that were willing to answer, like very small companies too. So that was very nice. Next, there were a total of 126 responses who indicated their work location. You can see the full list under table 18, 19, 20, and 21 in the handout. And this map over here shows the distribution of respondents located within the continents of North America, Europe, Asia, and South America. At this point, I am very disappointed that I didn't get anybody from Africa, Australia, or Antarctica who answered my survey. A highlight, just to mention to you, is that 40% of the respondents were outside of North America. And this is very important to me because, again, software was developed by Americans for Americans back then. And the fact that there are people outside answering, looking in, is very, very nice right there. In regards to how many years they've been working in the industry, there were a total of 236 responses. You can view the years in detail under table 25 in the handout. Shown here is a histogram summarizing the distribution of respondents among the number of years they have worked in the industry. And of course, the highlight that you can see here, and by the way, what I was thinking the histogram would look like was that there were more people answering like 20 to 25 years, but there was actually, the majority were actually at least 10 years within the industry who answered. I'm actually absolutely amazed by at least 35 years that somebody was willing to answer my survey too. In regards to titles, I wanted to know what titles they had. I had about 227 responses, and you can see the full list under H3 under the handout. I also mentioned under H3 too that I didn't modify any of the titles unless they explicitly put their company's name in there, or it really, you can find out who they are in the company. I wanted to keep it as anonymous as possible, but there was only like 10 that I modified because it was too obvious. But I never, ever expected to get 4 presidents, 5 CEOs, 10 chief technology officers, 15 vice presidents, and over 50 managers, principals, and directors who answered the industry survey questionnaire. That was absolutely unexpected. And that really says a lot to me, especially when I can get my email all the way up to the president or CEO, who actually was willing to take the time and answer it. In terms of their highest level of education, I had a total of 263 responses. Presented here is a bar chart summarizing the distribution of respondents among the highest level of education. You can see that the majority were either having a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. However, I was extremely humbled that I got 34 with a PhD, since it is the highest level of university degree awarded to anyone who has successfully completed a lengthy piece of original research. And having 34 people who were willing to answer said to me, wow, these people have completed something big, and they will be beneficial on answering the industry survey questionnaire. In terms of the group, and the reason why I included this is because even though you indicated your title, I want to know specifically what group within the company they were part of, because you can be a manager of a localization team, but I'd rather have them indicate that they're a manager or supervisor instead of the localization group. So there were 7 groups listed, as you can see, from experience design all the way to international localization. And you can notice that the majority of respondents were in the international localization group or corporate and executive. Followed by development, engineering, research, and manager supervisor. I was very lucky enough to at least have a few people from up there too, including experience design and usability. I wish that was a little bit increased, but only got 3 out of that one. Now, the next following slides are the data observations and hypothesis tests. And this is the part where I would look at Dr. Chance, and hopefully I'm saying all these correct. The first one are the results for calculating the averages for each industry survey statement. Now, using the Likert scale, where 5 means strongly agree, 4 means somewhat agree, 3 with neither, 2 with somewhat disagree, and 1 with strongly disagree, we're able to calculate the averages for each of the statements. Now, this table looks different from your table 2 because it's actually sorted by the averages from the highest to the lowest. Highlighted in red that you see there are the 2 statements that did not tend towards strongly agree or somewhat agree by the industry responses, which is course and abroad. Course basically means that students should not learn software internationalization entirely by course, and abroad is studying abroad for software internationalization. The top 5 statements, on the other hand, first is student must be aware of the possible technologies and tools used for language translation and text representation. Second, student must be aware of how dates and times are used in various cultures and countries. Third, student must be aware of how number and currency systems are different for various cultures and countries. Fourth, student must be aware of the possible technologies and tools to represent the direction of text in various languages. And lastly, student must define and distinguish between software internationalization, localization, and globalization. The next part is checking for sample size. And by the way, this table is sorted based on how your table 2 is looking like right now, so it can help you follow along. The table, the magic number for a sufficient sample size is 167. The calculation to determine 167 is actually found within the thesis. I do not want to put all that math up there. As you can see, all of them exceeded 167. Not one single one of them was close to 167 as a sample size at all. What this tells us is that the sample size is sufficiently large enough to carry out statistical hypothesis tests. The first hypothesis test was to measure whether each of the statements received responses with equal proportions. You can view the details in table 22 of the handout. In better words, did each of the statements receive equal responses among the Likert scale? After using a chi-square goodness of fit test, the result is that each of the statements were answered significantly different. In better words, each of the statements did not receive equal responses among the Likert scale. All of them were exactly not equal at all, which is good. Basically, there is not 20% among each of the responses that you have. Now, this is going to be a huge chunk of the slides, and there will be 3 slides for this. The second and last hypothesis test I conducted was to measure whether each of the statements received responses with a significant majority, that is, at least 50%. You can view the entire results in table 23 and 24 of the handout. In better words, did each of the statements receive a significant majority, strongly agree, overall disagree, or strongly disagree. The test for significant majority was done against two significant values. The test was done against a significance value of alpha equals 0.05 and alpha of 0.05 divided by 24, and first and second slide after this respectively. Before explaining each of the significant value, we must understand what a significance value is. A significant value is usually denoted as an alpha, and is the largest value that can be tolerated, defines the rejection region, and is chosen depending on the seriousness of a type 1 error. And for those who don't know what a type 1 error is when the null hypothesis is rejected, when in fact it is true. Now, the first slide that you will see is comparing against alpha of 0.05, a value that's traditionally used in statistics. The second slide, on the other hand, will compare against 0.05 divided by 24, or approximately 0.002, and this is done through the Bonferroni adjustment in reference to 24 simultaneous statements used in the industry survey. Since each statement increases the probability of a type 1 error, a more conservative level to use for any conclusion is alpha equals 0.05 divided by the number of statements. And that's how we got that one. The reason why I want to show you both these slides is just for you to compare and contrast, but in reality, the one that we'll be using is the alpha of 0.05 divided by 24 on my resulting framework. So first, on the alpha equals 0.05, a value traditionally used in statistics, looking at the table, an entry of strongly agree means a significant majority strongly agrees with the statement. An entry of overall agree means a significant majority overall agrees with the statement. Overall agree means that there was responses of strongly agree and somewhat agree combined together. An entry of neither means no significant majority overall agree and no significant majority overall disagree with a statement. And of course, there's not a single entry where there was an overall disagree or strongly disagree, which would have been, for those things. Now you can see that a significant majority overall agree with 20 of the 24 statements. 2 had neither, and 2 had strongly agreed. For the strongly agree one, for technology aware and data aware, it is student must be aware of possible technologies and tools for creating software that supports internationalization, and student must be aware of how dates and times are used in various cultures and countries. Now, the reason why I highlighted the ones in red is because either there is a change between the two significant values, which we will see in the next slide, or they stood out from the results. And the ones that I believe stood out from the results were the strongly agreed. Those were the ones with the highest score on that part. Not highest score. We'll get back to that. Now, this slide tested against a significant value of 0.05 divided by 24, or approximately 0.002. As you can see, the 2 that used to be strongly agreed are now overall agreed. The one that used to be overall agreed were noise elements, but now has become neither. Now we can say that a significant majority overall agree with 21 out of 24 statements, and with 3 with neither. Recall that since each statement increases the probability of type 1 error, the significance level will be used by the final framework for software internationalization. Now we reach to the conclusion, and you guys are still alive and awake, which I'm happy about, which will go over the resulting framework, contributions, lessons learned, and future work. Table 6 in the handout provides the resulting framework sorted in order of importance using the results we've discovered. However, the conclusion that can be made from the resulting framework is this. The majority of respondents from the industry overall agree that in order for computer science and software engineering graduates to be prepared for industry, the university should teach software students software internationalization by integrating the various requirements from Table 6 in order of importance into current existing courses. Table 6, by the way, is prioritized based on the averages that we got earlier, and were either included or excluded based on the hypothesis test of significant majority. All right, now we reach to my contributions. Why the heck is my thesis going to contribute to computer science and software engineering? After answering the research question through research and industry validation, a number of contributions have resulted. First, I gathered and analyzed the set of requirements from literature review on the state of education for software internationalization. And if you are a master's student, you'll be doing tons of reading. And through those tons of reading, I was able to get these requirements. Second, I contacted representatives of the industry asking for input on the set of requirements from the literature review. Third, I organized and prioritized requirements for students to gain sufficient knowledge for software internationalization. Fourth, I validated and prioritized requirements using statistical analysis and hypothesis testing. Fifth, I presented a validated framework with a sufficient set of requirements for the education of software internationalization coursework. And the fifth one is, of course, important. One of the things I would like to put on there, but I will see if I have time for this, is I would like to also forward my thesis, my wonderful PDF, to the universities in the United States and also around the world, saying, here's contributing research. But I also believe the organization, LISA, might actually put in their newsletter. They actually apparently put my link on the newsletter for the Institute Survey Questionnaire. I think a highlight I'd like to mention from that is that during the time they sent out that email, I remember I was getting like 50 responses. I'm like, come on. And the next day it went to 150. And the next few days was quite high. Throughout the process, there was a number of lessons learned. First off, universities should pay further attention to the growing field of software internationalization. And there's also key members of major organizations such as ACM, LISA, and the Unicode Consortium that can be contacted through their member mailing list. Representatives from the industry have helped guide the research question and thesis. It has changed multiple times and they have narrowed it down for me. Planning and writing a thesis takes a lot of time and motivation, Travis. And of course, do not expect to complete a thesis within a time frame of your choice. I was hoping to finish this back in December, now I'm here. If someone out there would like to continue my future work, there is plenty of future work that can come from here. First off, someone would carry out various case studies implementing the framework. This would take multiple years, but it's one thing that people can consider. Someone could reevaluate the validity of the framework by either modifying, adding, and removing requirements. Third, someone could reevaluate the validity of the framework by increasing the number of subjects from different companies, programming experience, or groups of the company. Fourth, someone could consider other possible venues besides using the web survey. If somebody really wants to go to every single company and fly into each one of them, they have more power than me. That's a lot of money. And lastly, someone could evaluate other important requirements for the framework. For example, I got some emails who were interested in my research, and the biggest thing that I got common that I didn't cover was about software internationalization security. And for those who don't know, if you're a big quality assurance tester, if you put in the search bar and you put Unicode, sometimes it could crash the system if they didn't validate it beforehand. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's something good if you guys want to be a tester. Thank you so much again for attending my presentation. There's plenty of donuts and coffee. The room is now open for any questions, and the Thesis Committee would love to definitely hear more of your questions and comments and be able. Otherwise, you guys can go and have fun, but the Thesis Committee will be in this room by themselves and determine my fate. Thank you. Any questions? No questions from people. I was more worried about that. Yes, Jason?
Just kind of, you were talking about colleges that would maybe offer some kind of international program. You go study internationalization abroad. Is there any that exists?
Internationalization abroad?
Well, work with testers in a foreign country, kind of see how they work with things.
I haven't looked around for that.
Okay. Seems kind of cool. Good idea.
I do know that when I was at IBM working on the ICU project, that's the biggest thing. When I looked at all the code and I realized how much Unicode can really damage a system, that's something that I'm kind of shocked that people aren't completely aware about. The letter A, to us, looks like a letter A, but this letter A can be a Unicode character that can basically be unrecognizable. I actually crashed my part-time job, though, with Unicode. I was trying to figure out until I realized my name, John Hun Vu, has a Unicode character, and my whole entire system crashed. And it took me a long time until I realized, oh, it's because my name has a Unicode character. Any other questions? Yes, Adam.
You mentioned that a lot of the universities out there aren't adequately supporting software internationalization.
Yeah.
Did you rank them at all? And if so, where did Cal Poly fall in there?
I didn't rank any of the universities there. It would be a little bit too much, but I do know that looking on a huge perspective, not a lot of universities are teaching it. Okay. They are slowly teaching it here and there, but it's not greatly enforced at all. But at Cal Poly, I do know that with Dr. Brechner, he really encourages it within his projects. It's a little bit talked about in professional ethics, and in software engineering with Dr. Jansen, it was also asked to do localization. So it's starting, but I think most of the people who go into the industry will learn by themselves. But I'm doing it right now at Zynga, and it's not that fun at all. Setting up the infrastructure, at least. Any other questions? And I was introduced to software internationalization when I was at Adobe. I didn't realize that the internationalization team would give me a call after I modified the code like 2 or 3 times, and I'm like, John, every time you change your code, it takes a whole day to localize for 23 languages.
Right.
So, yes, Dr.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Apple was not willing to participate, because I recall mentioning in an email that Diane sent out, there is somebody at Apple who is looking for an intern with internationalization.
Irony.
Yeah.
The reason why I knew that it was kind of odd that Apple didn't answer is because on the ICU project when I worked at IBM, Apple was one of our biggest members who was in our weekly meetings. And I told them, you guys haven't answered this yet. And they're like, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. And even at the end, they didn't answer it. So I was kind of sad. But I think it's more of, if you know from Apple, they're very private about their whole entire company.
Actually, I have a question about this. Did you contact the companies for official responses, or were the responses that you received essentially the private opinions of individuals who happen to work at a particular company?
Some companies represented the whole entire company.
Okay.
Some responses were like that, and some of them were just individuals. Most likely, the people that I contacted were, if I already knew the company or I knew them from being here at Cal Poly, I contacted them directly saying, can you please forward this to your engineers? Sometimes I forward to HR, university recruiting, and sometimes I did it to the public relations. Apparently public relations, they really liked my idea. But apparently some other companies, they didn't really like my idea at all. Yes, Corey?
All right, I'm just curious, to listening to your thesis, you're saying that to validate the framework, that the requirements need to be consistent and complete?
Yes.
All right, well, I'm curious, like in your survey that you sent out to the 1,000 companies, was there any area for a free response if somebody wanted an additional requirement to ensure that it's complete?
Good question. The answer simply is no. There are only open responses for under the demographics. But the nicest thing, of course, is that they also emailed me directly back because they were forwarded the survey, and they actually told me you should have included this, which was about software internationalization security. That was the biggest common response where I said, you didn't include anything about that. So there you go.
Okay.
But one thing I wanted to mention about the consistency too is that that framework, if you read in my thesis, there were about maybe 10 authors that said the same similar things. So I basically, that's how I compiled it all together. Yes, dear Dr. Chance, did I do something wrong?
Can I ask, as a curious audience member for the
Yeah.
Thesis Committee? So, now I'm going to get my 2 questions. Did you do any, maybe just informally, any subsetting of like maybe the CEOs or some of those groups and see if their responses were any different? Or?
I didn't. There was a time that I was curious just by looking by myself. I don't remember the results. I do know that some of the answers from the engineers was everywhere. There was one person who really hated my research and put strongly disagree for everybody. And some people put all neither, but I didn't see any huge consensus. But that's a good future work, which I could have added.
Would you say it's fair to say that the industry expectation or desire is mostly that they're aware of these issues, not that they've had much practical experience?
Good question. I believe, well, here's the part of the bias that I was worried about my research. Apparently, when I sent it to many of the companies, they forwarded it to somebody who was aware about localization or was actually working with localization. And sometimes it actually got to people who never did it at all. So that could have biased results and could have possibly done that.
But it seemed the top 2 were they should be aware of
Yeah.
these issues, and that the practice and the applications seem to be consistently lower than that.
Correct. And if you look at the final result, that was kind of the common thing. It was all aware, but applying is not a really big thing. So.
Do you think that's because they want to train people themselves, or they just have that
Yeah, I guess so. And maybe I know that from a few people that I've talked to, is just basically they realize that universities are way too packed with other more important stuff that it's good to be aware, but you don't really have to apply it. So.
In your survey, maybe a future survey, if this stuff was to come into the curriculum, there's some stuff in the current curriculum that we might be willing to move out that doesn't seem as important.
Yeah.
Important. So your survey was all about this issue. It didn't kind of say these issues are more important than non-internationalization.
That would be a good future work there, yes. Dr. Carver?
I have a related question about the bias. Since your participants were self-selected,
Yeah.
to me it seems
Well,
obvious.
it wasn't selected by anybody,
No,
it was selected by
themselves.
Yes.
They could choose to participate or not.
Yeah.
Of course, there's no way to force anybody to participate in such a survey.
Correct.
But my guess is that they were strongly motivated because either they were strongly in favor of localization or a few of them maybe strongly against it. But many people would say, I don't really care. How do you get those people to participate? Or do you feel that's not really relevant for you?
I did try to encourage them as much as possible to try to give it out to as many of their engineers as possible. But yes, again, I can't really force it. I mean, we saw I can show you the slides, which is basically the groups. When I was really hoping that they wouldn't be the highest, but they were. And that's the one that was kind of.
Oh, yeah. The
There you go.
ones working in that area.
So this one had the biggest one. So, again, I really wish to, and I really wish I can go to the companies themselves and interview, but that's the biggest thing that I was kind of worried about too. So, but even, here's the surprising part too. There were some responses from the globalization and internationalization group that completely disagree. And I think it's because the word is students should blah, 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 student must. And that's the reason why.
A related question, I'm not sure if it's for you or for Dr. Chance. If you have a survey that is designed in such a way that you're expecting most people to either agree or strongly agree with you, is there an effect that people will just go through the survey and just check everything on the right or on the left?
Was the ordering of the questions the same every time?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question that you gave me. One of the slides I didn't include because it seemed a little bit out of place was threat stability. There was no guarantee that there might have been duplicate responses, and there was no guarantee that I can avoid certain groups because it was selected by the people. Caitlin.
You said you excluded some results that you only had. There was a slide where there were 371 responses, but you only used about 280 something of them.
Yeah.
What was your limiting factor? Just that they didn't have the background in it all, or what was your limiting factor to remove all of
My
those?
only two limiting factors was one, they did not answer any of the survey statements at all. It was completely left blank. So I'm like, why should I add their demographics in there? And two, they were clearly not in the industry, which is basically students and professors. And of course, the professors were very biased. The ones I eliminated, they were, yes, we strongly agree with everything. But after I removed them, it shifted everybody back towards the middle.
Did you think at all about including the professor's input, seeing since they're the ones teaching the classes as well?
It could be, but I was mostly looking for the industry because the industry and academia are completely separate in my opinion, because we wanted to know what the industry really wanted, because many of the professors are like, yes, we should totally teach software internationalization or put it more. So I felt that was a little bit biased.
Back to your question, I am a little encouraged that you did see some differentiation between being aware versus having experience. So they were at least meeting the questions to that degree.
Actually, yes. When they were saying the word being aware, then the next one is being applied. I did see a huge response between the where they were totally agreeing with, but when I say applying, they're like, eh. So they put somewhat disagree on that part.
This was the sixth one was first apply.
Yeah.
And it was labs and experience.
Yeah. Any other questions before I let them deliberate? Yes,
I
Dr.
have
Kerr.
one last question. Did you eat your own dog food and internationalize your survey?
Did I eat my own dog food?
Yeah. And apply your research to your survey.
Oh. What
Have you translated your survey in various?
Oh no, no, I didn't.
Well,
Yes, that would be a problem.
how is he going to sign now?
Right.
I don't think SurveyMonkey had a framework that allowed me to do the translation. That would be actually cool. But.
Yeah.
Any other questions before Ryan Bridge turns off his camera and I turn off everything else? Yes, Corey.
Actually, in terms of the word framework, since
Yeah.
it's somewhat ambiguous in software engineering terms, that it could actually be like a software framework.
Yes.
Java and so common that we use in classes. Do you explicitly define what you mean by framework in this paper?
Correct.
Okay.
Dr. Turner, he tortured me for 2 months on that word. He's like, what do you mean by framework? I'm like, it's the dictionary word. He's like, no, that's not good enough. So one thing I didn't include in my slides is an organization called the
8 years old with a flour sack cape tied all around his neck. He climbed up on the garage figuring, what the heck? Well, he screwed his courage up so tight, the whole thing came unwound. He got a running start and bless his heart, he headed for the ground. He's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your arms and hold your breath, and always trust your fate. All grown up with a flour sack cape tied all around his dreams. He's full of piss and vinegar, and he's busted at the seams. Well, he licked his finger, checked the wind, it's gonna be do or die. He wasn't scared of nothing, boys, he was pretty sure he could fly. Well, he's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your arms and hold your breath, and always trust your fate. Old and gray with the flour sack cape tied all around his head. Well, he's still jumping off the garage, and he will be till he's dead. All these years the people said he's acting like a kid. He did not know he could not fly, so he did. He's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your arms and hold your cape,